Alright, so down to the final two. Today I'll be taking a look at Mercedes' 2023 Formula One season. So of course there are two drivers, Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. And now last season, Russell did beat Hamilton in points head-to-head and in the championship. And you know, many of these key stats I have on the board, but I think generally the overall consensus was that Hamilton was the better driver last season, just that Russell was much luckier. And of course, there's excuses that earlier in the season, early in 2022, Hamilton was using a lot of experimental setups, sometimes taking a setup that wasn't so good. So I think coming into this year, I think it was going to be, really interesting to see who would come out on top. I do think Hamilton proved this year. He still has it. He's still a fantastic Formula One driver. So in the points head-to-head, 234 points for Hamilton, 175 for Russell. Hamilton finished third in the championship, Russell 8th. So behind quite a few drivers there, Russell was. So average finishing position, Hamilton 5.2, Russell 6.1. So 1.1 positions difference, not too bad, but still not great either. Qualify head-to-head, 11 apiece. So they tied in the head-to-head. The qualifying gap average went slightly in Hamilton's favor, 0.034 seconds, which is basically nothing. For reference, last year Hamilton had the advantage in qualifying by 0.09 seconds, so almost a tenth of a second. So the gap closed somewhat, and with these numbers where it's it's so small, you could just say it's just pretty random. But at the same time, I think with Hamilton getting older every year, and with qualifying being one of the aspects of driving that generally declines the quickest with age, you could look at these two numbers and let's say, maybe Hamilton's still kind of starting to fall off a bit in terms of peak qualifying performance. So that's something that I think will be interesting to look at next year. For average starting position, 6.6 for Hamilton, 6.8 for Russell, so very, very close there. Kind of showing in qualifying, arguably the two closest drivers on the grid. Now in my power rankings, a bit of a different story. Hamilton on average 4.3, which is one of the best drivers of the season. Very close to Alonso, very close to Norris as well. Whereas Russell, on average, I had him 8th, which is I think in the lower end of the drivers at the front of the grid. I think about the same as Sainz, maybe a little bit worse. Podiums, 6 for Hamilton, 2 for Russell. Of course, Russell going a long time without a podium and then finally getting that second podium at the very last race of the season. No wins, so Mercedes' first winless F1 season since 2011. So it's been a very, very long time since they won a full season without a win. But that being said, they did get a pole position, and that was of course courtesy of Lewis Hamilton at the Hungarian Grand Prix, one of Hamilton's best tracks. Now looking at how Mercedes developed through the season, their first 11 races, their average qualifying position was 7.3. Second half of the season, that improved to 6.1. So the qualifying performance actually improved through the second half of the season, despite the fact that McLaren jumped up quite a bit. Of course, helped by the fact that Aston Martin took a massive step back in the second half of the season in qualifying. But I think oddly enough, compared to many of the other teams, all the other teams that have done so far, if qualifying improved, points also improved. If qualifying went down, if qualifying got worse, points tally also went down. Well, here it's actually the opposite. Qualifying improved, but the points tally actually went down. So in the first 11 races, 223 points for Mercedes. Second 11 races, 186. That's a difference of about just shy of 50 points, which is not a lot, but it's also pretty big as well. Like, it's not an absolutely massive amount like we saw with Aston and McLaren, where they would score less than 100 points in one half and over 200 points in the other half. It's only just a difference of 50 points. But still, it's interesting to note. Taking a look at Mercedes' run over the last 4 years, of course, the first 2 years, Constructors' Champions, 2020, 573 points, obviously a shortened season, and if it had been a full 2021 race season, it would have gone a lot more than that, given how dominant that car was. Average pole gap, 0.002 seconds. Got every pole bar 2, which was of course Turkey, where Stroll got pole, and the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, where Verstappen took pole. And I generally, when I calculate this statistic, I get rid of the wet qualifying session, so it's really only one dry qualifying session they didn't get pole. 2021, 613.5 points. Again, Constructors champions, lost to drivers. That's a different story. Average pole gap, though, of course, Red Bull did get quite a bit closer, so the average pole gap was 0.112 seconds, which was still better than Red Bull in 2021. 2022, of course, first year of the new regulations, they had a massive drop, 515 points, third in the Constructors. They were catching up to Ferrari the second half of the season due to Ferrari's litany of operational blunders, let's say, in that season. Average pole gap 0.793 seconds, which is pretty bad, but it was third best last year. Of course, bad compared to what they were expecting, where they were always within a tenth or less than a tenth in off pole on average. 2023, the points tally doesn't improve, 409 points, but that's a lot of that can be down to the increased competition. Of course, competition from McLaren, competition from Aston Martin, which just wasn't there in 2022. Constructors, they did finish second. It was very close at the end with Ferrari, but they did get second in the Constructors. Average pole gap 0.459. It is an improvement off of last year, but I do think it is something that Mercedes is going to want to try to focus on a bit next year. Although, of course, given how strong Red Bull was in race pace, it honestly doesn't matter how fast you are in qualifying if you are not able to stay up with the Red Bulls in race trim. So for Mercedes, of course, next year, of course, the other last talking point I want to mention with Mercedes is that very early in 2023, of course, they abandoned their zero-pod concept. They got rid of their technical director, Mike Elliott, and they basically were surviving somehow with a Franken car that had a lot of 2024 parts on it that was, of course, wasn't designed for those parts. There was a lot of experimentation, trying out new parts that they are thinking of using for the 2024 car. So I do expect a sizable improvement from Mercedes next year, going to a new concept. Of course, the hope, the worry is that you get that concept completely wrong, and you're basically toast for the last 2 years of these regulations. Of course, for Mercedes, though, I think if they can make a massive jump up the way that McLaren did, I think they could position themselves to maybe fight for wins regularly and maybe even fight for a championship. I don't know how close of a championship it is unless Red Bull absolutely drops a ball, but something like Ferrari in 2017, Ferrari in 2018, where they're at least competing for the championship for about half of the season, 2/3 of the season, I think is in the realm of possibility for a team like Mercedes. So that's my review for Mercedes 2023 season. I think compared to what they would have been hoping going into the season, I think is a bit disappointing. Of course, no wins, 1 pole, only 8 podiums between them, between the two drivers. And I think they're definitely going to be looking to next year as kind of making a big step forward and trying to hopefully compete for wins and championships again. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.